Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm, and we're delighted that you're able to join us for this webinar that is sponsored by our good friends at RenWeb. Today, we're going to have a crisis leadership conversation conducted by Firestorm's President, Jim Satterfield. This will cover things that have happened over the last 4 or 5 months that we've been involved in. We'd also like you to become our friend. Facebook, we're Firestorm Solutions. Twitter, we're Firestorm Soul. And there is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We do want to remind you the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product presented should be read and considered in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. This information should not be considered legal advice or legal opinion. RenWeb has been our sponsor and host of these webinars for several years now. This is the 10th in the 2016 Crisis Coach webinar series. You can go to firestorm.com and you can watch past webinars for the past several years, and you can register for future webinars. Our moderator today is Scott Smith with RenWeb. Scott, over to you, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just want to welcome everybody for attending today. Again, we absolutely enjoy being teamed up with Firestorm and having all of their knowledge on these issues that come across, and just here to help and answer any RenWeb related questions compared to anything that we discussed today. And so thanks for having me.
Scott, we appreciate the relationship that we've had over the last several years, and the chance not only to do the webinars, but to be at the user conference and meet a large percentage of the schools within the RenWeb family. So I think it's important that RenWeb provides software to help you run your school every day, as well as tools that can be used to help deal with some of the threats and notification requirements and management of the issues that are in front of you. So we're going to talk about those types of things today, and we'll hopefully make some progress in terms of what we see going on around us. I'd like everybody to think about the word crisis. If you heard the word crisis, what comes to your mind? And clearly the images that you see on the screen are examples of some of the things that might easily be considered as a crisis. And I think the last 3 or 4 months we've seen a surge of events happening around the country and having an impact on our schools wherever we are. And clearly a crisis is a turning point. Once that event happens, the trend of future events will be determined by the actions that you took and the words that you said during the crisis that was an experience there. But if we think about this word crisis and what comes immediately to mind, let me ask a slightly different question. What's the worst disaster that you'll ever see? Now, if we look at all those dots that are up on the screen, and some of them are gray, and some are light, and some are dark, some are white, take a moment and point out to me the school that's in crisis. Well, wait a minute, they all look kind of the same. It's hard to figure that out. But once a school finds itself in crisis, then it's going to stand out. It's going to become the center, like the red dot that you see starting to emerge in the center of the screen. It's going to stand out, and people will be forming opinions about that school based upon what they hear and what they think. So if the crisis doesn't occur, you blend back in. You're not there. You're not going to be a part of it. So the worst disaster you'll ever see is the one that happens to you, your school, or your family. And as we think about those things, and as you see them start to develop, suddenly the school becomes visible. And over time, as those impacts continue, and as that crisis is handled and managed, it's going to dominate everything around. And as you see the larger dot that has now emerged, that's the impact that that crisis can have. Whether the school can survive that, whether the damage that's done will last for years to follow, that's going to be dependent upon you to respond to the crisis. Today we're going to give you some discussion about the things that have been going on recently around the country, just to give you an insight of the types of events that you need to be planning for within your school. We'll also give you some things that you need to do immediately as a crisis develops, and then a list of some do's and don'ts, things that you absolutely should make sure that you do, and some things that you should absolutely make sure you avoid. So we've got a lot of ground to cover in our call today, and I look forward to sharing some of those insights with you. In getting ready for today, we stopped to take a look at what have we been seeing, what's been in the news, what's been driving the conversation around crisis in schools. And a word that came up uniformly from multiple sources, and I apologize, I have a phone ringing behind me there, is the word violence. And we've seen a lot of violence over the last 90 to 120 days. We've seen shootings ranging from shootings in the club down in Orlando, which you could call that domestic terrorism if you'd like, but it's now the largest workplace violence event in terms of fatalities in the United States that occurred in that event. We've seen similar threats at clubs and events around the country following it. We've seen shootings like in Washington State at the Macy's department store at the mall, in the cosmetics department. And you would think that of all the places that would be safe, that a mall becomes a part of your community, and it's a chance for you to think about what's going on and where you are. By the way, there were warning signs in both of the shootings that we've just described that you could see that there was a path to violence, and that's going to be a theme that we're going to talk about more during the rest of the year and into next year, that there are always warning signs. There are behaviors of concern that you can identify before that gun comes to school. Now, it doesn't have to be just a gun. We had in Minneapolis the attack in the mall with a knife where people were stabbed associated with it. We've had terrorism looking at the bombing in New York and New Jersey, and in combinations of are these organized events or are they lone wolves in coming into play. We've had police shootings where there's been questions of should the individual have been shot or not. We've also seen attacks directly on policemen in Texas and in Louisiana and the output of those areas. Those events have also led to civil unrest and demonstrations, and so violence becomes an increasing concern. Just recently, last month, we had shootings at a school in South Carolina, and I don't know if you followed it closely, but a 14-year-old boy killed his father, took the family car, drove to a school, an elementary school, and as he arrived, the fourth grade class was outside at recess with their teacher, and he started shooting. He shot two students and the teacher, though wounded, was able to get the children back into the school, get them safe from that standpoint. But when they got in, they put the school on lockout, notified the authorities, and the first responders who got there actually were able to overpower the young man with the gun, and no one else was hurt. Think about the impact that would happen if that was at your school. As you probably remember, we have retired FBI and Secret Service agents that are a part of Firestorm that do site inspections and work on plans, and one of them received a call from a reporter saying, would you agree to do an interview about it? And he said yes, and a little later the reporter called back to work out the details of conducting the interview, and in that call the reporter said, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal, we're not going to do anything. Think about that for a minute. I'm sure if you asked the teacher, do you think this was a big deal? If you asked the parents of the two children who were shot, I think they would think it was a big deal. You may not have followed in the story that of the two children shot, one was a little boy in the fourth grade. He was shot in the leg. He subsequently died as a result of his injuries. They were not able to stop the bleeding, and it hit an artery in that area. I'm sure those parents think it's a really big deal. When you think about violence today, we've become more accustomed to it. It's become more an acceptable way of life. It takes a lot to shock us these days. As we focus on these elements today, violence is an issue that's apparent in our schools, whether it's bullying, cyberbullying, sexting, the gun coming to school, all of those elements are there. We've even seen it highlighted recently with the clown hoax that's going on through social media locations. We had a school up in the Chicago area where the clowns said they were coming to the junior high, and what did they want the individuals to do. And when they did that, they were asking for input from the students. What would you like us to do? Those junior high kids started saying, I'd like you to shoot this teacher or that teacher, or certain sexual acts that were coming in. Violence is a real factor in your school, and the key is going to be for everyone to identify the behaviors of concern before they escalate into an action on the violent act. So as we move out of that, let's think about natural disasters. We've certainly seen flooding going on. It's in fact still going on in North Carolina, record levels there, and the damages around. We've had the threat with Hurricane Matthew. But we talked about the human element earlier and what that means. This is a beach house down on St. Simon's Island. Imagine that was your house. It's sitting there on the rocks. You go over those rocks and down the little stairway and be on the beach, and you can see the water over in the right-hand side, the waves starting to break there on the beach. During the hurricane, the water came up, covered the beach, covered the rocks, and started to spill over. And there was an early threat that the storm surge from the hurricane would be 20 feet high. Imagine 20 feet above those rocks. Look at where it would hit upon that house. You think it could stand? You think it would remain? I think the lesson here is that all disasters are personal. They come back to relate to you and where you are, and to your students and your teachers and your parents, and looking at those. But natural disasters will be an ongoing factor, whether it's the winter storms that will be coming later in the year, or the flooding or hurricanes or tornadoes, or in California, the earthquakes that might happen. So in addition to violence, we have to think about natural disasters as we think about the crises that we've seen. Cybersecurity becomes a concern that affects all of us, and we can't unfortunately put it under lock and key like the picture that you see there to keep everything out. Yahoo announced that they had been hacked, and billions, that's with a B, of individuals were impacted with lost information as a result of it. We see the health insurers sometimes having their databases hacked, and we see across the board with banks and other institutions personally identifiable information, personal health information, and even HIPAA information being stolen. And so I think we become a little jaded and not responding as we hear those elements. Now, a couple of things to point out. First of all, a security breach and a cyber breach in this area is not an IT problem. It is a business problem, because it's your brand, your reputation. It's the information related to your students, your teachers, your parents that will be out there and available. Well, wait a minute. We're just a small school. We don't have a lot of those things. We wouldn't be a target associated with it. Unfortunately, you are. You're a target because they can look and see if they can gain access into your finances and your accounts to take your money, to get information about the parents and what accounts that they may or may not have, or your teachers have, and it also to implant ransomware within your system to deny you access to it. So security is a factor that affects all of us at every level. Moving beyond cyber, we go into brand impacts, and we've suddenly seen a lot of impacts that have happened here. Wells Fargo is at the center of this tangled web that's out there, with the 5,300 people that were impacted by losing their job because they opened millions of accounts for Wells Fargo customers without their permission. They got credit for opening new accounts with raises and bonuses and promotions, but individuals could potentially lose millions as a result of that. Regulators forced the bank to compensate those millions of accounts. The 5,300 were terminated along with the manager over the area, and just today the CEO resigned under pressure as a result of that. That impacted the credibility of a financial institution over decisions that were in fact made, and they'll be known. Samsung has had a problem with the Galaxy 7 phone where it burst instantly into flames. I don't know if you saw last week, but there was a plane preparing to take off. They were boarding passengers, and someone had the phone on the plane, and it burst into flames. And it was so hot that it melted through the floor of the plane. Now, fortunately, they got everyone off because the plane was still at the gate and no one was hurt. But imagine the impact had that happened in the air. Samsung has subsequently called for a product recall for all of those products and are compensating the individuals who had them. Think of the financial impact. Subsequently, and to that, they also had a problem with the transportation bringing all of their plans, the freight line that was shipping their merchandise into the West Coast for Christmas, all the TVs and other appliances, went into bankruptcy, and so that the boats turned around and went back. They may miss their Christmas season as a result of a supply chain failure. Think about the candidates and all the information we're seeing on TV and the rumors and innuendos and allegations both of language and assaults and crimes and confidentiality and other things that are in it. There's the impact that when you think of these individuals and you hear those names, those are the things that are going to resonate. When someone hears the name of your school, what's going to resonate with them? What's going to be the thought that comes to mind? And lastly, communicable illness. We had the Zika virus over the summer. It may not have been a factor in your state or around your area. In Florida, it was, and in particular Miami, it impacted tourism. It had impacted whether the children should be going to school at that point in time. Whether it's Zika or the swine flu or avian flu, or now we're entering the regular flu season, there's going to be disruption as a result of absenteeism caused from these types of events. Everything we've talked about up to this point had a background of warning signs. There were ways that you could see that these events were coming and make the appropriate decisions and take actions before they arrive. So what does all this mean? What are the lessons learned from seeing those types of disasters and events? First, that a crisis is not business as usual, it's business as unusual. It's not the same school, it's not the same thing that you're dealing with every single day. It's something that has changed in that particular environment and will have a significant impact. You can't do the same decisions that you did before the event, during and after. You need to have a plan in place of how you make decisions. We'll share with you in a few minutes that everything you learn initially in a crisis is wrong. You're going to be forced to make decisions upon wrong or incomplete information. That's why it's so critical that you have a plan that helps you structure that process and make sure that everyone's on the same base. The second line below that in lessons learned says that every crisis is a every time one of these events occurs, it's a person. It's a son, it's a daughter, it's a mother, a father, it's a brother or a sister. It's going to be a family that's going to be impacted in it. And as we think about crisis and managing in those types of events, we can never lose sight of that aspect. It's a matter of perspective. When we think about perspective, you see here is a bunch of pencils in a glass and some just laying down on a table. But every one of those pencils has a perspective. The blue or the red or the yellow or the black, they're looking at it from their viewpoint and their analysis of where they are. And it becomes very personal to them in this process. So what's the point? You've got to be aware of the perspective of everyone in your school. And remember that any of these events, as they start to occur, are personal, and all of your decisions are going to be based upon incomplete and wrong information. And if you don't have a formula to deal with that, you're going to find that there's a disproportionate negative impact on your school and your students. As we look at that, there's some things that you can do. You're going to pick under high visibility. You're going to be under great scrutiny. See the microscope there as an example of what's going to happen. Well, the solution to this is called Crisis Stop, S-T-O-P. That acronym is an example of what you need to think about in each one of these areas. And it's a chance for you to provide strategic help to your school to be able to deal with each of those things. So as you think about the letters in STOP, S-T-O-P, they stand for something, and it will give you a clue about how you can manage this crisis and come out with a better outcome for your students and teachers in school. First is to stabilize the situation. You want to stop. You want to slow it down. In many cases, you're going to find a rush to judgment, a rush to say something, a rush to do something, and that's generally wrong because you're basing it on wrong information. So the biggest help you can give initially is just slow everything down. Let's take a deep breath. Let's focus on what we know, not what we think. The second, the T in STOP, stands for trigger the appropriate resources. You need to engage your general counsel, who serves as counsel for the school, to help you better understand what are the liability and legal issues around it. Who is your insurance broker? Do we have coverage under those insurance policies here to address those types of things? Do we have counselors identified if there's been some violent act that occurred that we can come in and deal with to help our students? Do we have access for a forensic psychologist or psychiatrist to give us support? Do we have a crisis manager that we could call in? By the way, if you bring a crisis manager into the organization to help, ask them what crises they've managed before. You don't want to have let them be a rookie breaking into what they need to do. But you're going to need resources. Let's identify those, put them on notice, and start to get them to help us. Third, opine on the exposures. That O stands for opine. And that's to predict, to start to understand what could happen next. What's going to be the consequence? Are we going to be identified with the event, and that's going to become what our school is going to be known as? That's the brand and image thing that we talked about earlier with Wells Fargo or Samsung. If you think about that, you don't want this crisis event to define your students in your schools and, oh, you're the student there who graduated. If you deal with anyone who graduated from Columbine and they go to a job interview after they graduate from college, every interviewer will talk to them about Columbine because that becomes what they're known for. You don't want your school to be known for that. And then prevent common crisis errors and mistakes is the final P. What we're seeing is the same pattern repeated over and over, and in a few moments we're going to give you a list of do's, be sure you do this, and a list of don'ts, be sure you don't do that. So we're going to help you with STOP. One other thing I want to point out, you're on a RenWeb today, sponsored and underwritten by RenWeb. In this webinar, if you are a RenWeb client and you find yourself in a crisis, you get support from Firestorm. All you have to do is call. We'll get on the phone with you. We'll help you understand what's going on, help you stabilize the situation, help you see what resources that you need to trigger, help you understand what's going to happen next, work with you on messaging, and help you not make those mistakes, all at no cost. It's a primary benefit of being a RenWeb client and a RenWeb school as a result of that. Let's go a little bit more in depth here, and then I'll give you the do's and don'ts. You should see around this that one of the mistakes that happens is things get said that shouldn't have been said. There's a bunch of buttons on your screen, and you see the word up. So I want you to stop and think in that crisis about buttoning up, button your lip. Don't make comments. Everybody wants to talk about what they want to be true, not what is true. We did everything right. You'll find out that probably you didn't. We got involved recently with a school where there was a problem after a football game on a Friday night. By the way, the problem didn't occur at the football game. The problem didn't occur on school premises. The problem didn't occur at a school-sanctioned event. It had happened in a personal home. But the head of the school called a press conference and invited the media into the school to talk about the problem when it was not a school problem, and he was prohibited from talking about any of the details, and put themselves in the limelight to be judged by actions at a non-school event. You've got to be very careful. This is one of the biggest risks that you face, are those initial comments that you say. So after the stop came trigger the resources. Look at the tools. Do you have fire extinguisher to put it out, the fire alarm to be set off, the communications? Look at all the marbles that you have. What is their purpose? How do we use them? How do we get them engaged for us immediately at that point? Then predict the future, that old pine. What's going to be your next crisis? In all likelihood, it's going to be how you respond to this crisis. What you say and do will determine what the next crisis in your school is. So you don't want to have your actions and your words to drive that particular process. So let's come back. I promised you a do and a don't list. This is one that you might want to take a note or two on, and it will help you and help your team as you focus on it. Every crisis needs a general. Somebody's got to be in charge. Is that the head of your school? Is it a board member? Is it someone else within it? You can't have 6 people giving 6 different sets of direction in the crisis. There needs to be a crisis management team providing insight and direction, but at the end of the day, this isn't a popularity contest. It comes down to someone making the decision in a call. Now there will always be pressure. Somebody will call up, someone from the board or someone saying, you know, we've got to get in front of this. We have to frame this issue, and so we need to get out of communications and a message. When that pressure starts to build, I want you to ask why. When someone says, well, we need to say something, ask why. They'll give you an answer. Then answer why. And do that 5 times. If you ask the question why 5 times and there's a good answer in each of those 5s, you probably should go ahead and communicate. If they can't answer that question, if they can't overcome the why, then you should not be communicating. Almost every initial communications in a crisis is the wrong communication. There will also be questions about why should you communicate now? Because again, remember the situation's fluid and you're prohibited for talking about students. You can't talk about the health of a student and how many were and who was injured in those particular aspects. And you definitely should not be dealing with the media. I'm going to say this several times in several different ways this afternoon, but if you have to do a communications, you know how to speak directly to your students. You know how to speak directly to your parents. You know how to speak directly to your teachers. You don't have to go to the media to deliver your message. And in fact, they'll deliver a different message than yours. So this ability to slow everything down, have a general, and asking yourself why is the beginning point so that we don't make those common mistakes. You must know that everything you learn within the first 24 hours is probably wrong or factually inaccurate. So that's a reason to slow your communications down. Document media calls. If the media calls, write down the name of the reporter, the station, the contact information. Have someone keep that log, but don't return those calls. You're looking for a pattern to be developed. Make sure that all your employees know that they're not the spokesperson. They could make the statement there that you see on the screen, that they're not an authorized spokesperson for the school, and they'd be happy to pass that information. I want you to always anticipate if we have injuries, if we have fatalities, if there's been a criminal act, you are no longer in control of your school. The police or the fire are controlling that location. They'll tell you how you're going to do reunification. They're going to take control of your property. And so you need to immediately appoint someone to interface with them. I don't want the head of the crisis team doing that, because that head has got to stay and help lead the response that we're going to do, but someone's got to be able to communicate back and forth with the first responders. If you do communicate, you want to stick to your themes, your home bases. Home bases are essentially what your school is about and what you're going to do. We're never going to talk about what happened. If you are explaining this, then there is no explanation for these types of events. You want to talk about what does define your school. So the 3 key messages The 3 home bases that you can say instead of no comment are as follows. Number 1, this event will not define who we are. What does define your school? You probably, if you look on your website, will talk about your mission to build knowledge, to help support the moral and ethical behavior of the students, to help them grow spiritually, morally, physically, in every single aspect. That's what your school is about. It's not about this horrible thing that's occurred. The second message is that you will invent the future. Whatever it takes, you're going to put programs in place. This is a continuous improvement process to make sure that these acts don't happen again, that this will be the safest school in the state or in your part of the country. And the last message, though, it's not about what defines the school. It's not about the future. It's about the families. You want to embrace the families in this respect. That's really where your focus would be. So those 3 messages can always be used regardless of the crisis. This will not define us. This event will not define us. We'll invent the future, and we'll embrace the families. Keep to those levels, much more powerful than saying no comment or saying even worse, something that's wrong. Now, the message maps, you should go on now and start to write what you would say if certain things would happen. What would we say if we had a death of a student? What would we say if we had a sexual molestation or a fraud event in the school? Plan those messages out. What's the first thing, the second, and the third? And it's easier to edit than to create. So if you lay those out now, you'll be in a much stronger position at that time. Monitor social media. The statistics around here are startling. 80% of the time, if someone has ill intent, somebody else knows. And 67% of the time, 2 or more people know. And when people know, what do? They talk. And where do they talk today? They talk on social media. So the correct term of art here is open source intelligence. That's what we refer to of monitoring what's going on social media, and it now can be done very inexpensively. So it's more than how many people opened our fall festival campaign to understanding that there's a threat or a risk associated with it. The next 3 really relate to the family. We want you to have a strategy for those families. If a child has been hurt or even worse died, it's going to have a huge impact. So you need to focus on them. You want to have a support team from the school with family representatives. I recommend a man and a woman, 3 teams of 2 each, total of 6 to cover a 24-hour shift, so that you can then have them assigned to help. What does this family need? How can the school be there? They've lost a child. You've lost a student. This is part of what it's like to be a part of a community and a family of taking care of those. We've seen it work in school environments. We've seen it work in business environments. You need to have that focus there. And before you make any communications about a child who's been hurt or killed in this event, you want to clear all communications related with that with the family. You do not want to have the school saying one thing and the family saying another. That's going to create a schism for everyone that's involved. So we've said two pages of what to do. What do you not do? Well, don't say anything. Remember that word stop? Just be quiet. Take the button slide, put the button on your lip, and don't communicate. The first 24 hours, you are not wanting to get your comments out. I've never met a police chief or a sheriff or a fire chief who didn't love the media. They want to hold a press conference and talk about what they did. That's great. You let them do that. You're not going to say anything. You're not going to stand on the platform for them. Let them communicate, because they're communicating about the problem. When you communicate, you're going to be communicating about the future and the solution. So the first thing is don't say anything. And if I was unclear on the previous slides, do not talk through the media. I'm going to raise my voice. Do not talk through the media. The media is not there to help. It's there to sell advertisements. And the way they do that is by creating sensationalism, and that drives their numbers up. You do not want to deal with the media. If they call you and you speak with them, they'll say, oh, I called the school today, I spoke to Jim Smith, and anything they say after it makes it sound as if Jim Smith said those comments. So you want to plan and be able to deal directly. You want to, and we'll reinforce that several more times. Don't give numbers, dates, and facts because it could change. You don't want to get into a number game because you told me yesterday that there were 6 people, and now I understand there are 8 people involved. You're losing in those areas. Don't put it in writing. Have a face-to-face meeting with the students, with the teachers, with the parents. If you have to, talk with them over the phone. Don't send out emails. Don't send documentation because that will be used by the media in reference. If there is a statement you want to get out, create the statement and have it placed on your website. That doesn't leave the media any option but just to specifically refer to those areas. I shared earlier, don't explain. If you're explaining, you're losing, and you can't change what happened. There is no, how do you explain that a 14-year-old brought a gun to school and started shooting your students? How do you explain that the little boy died in the 4th grade? Those are things that can't be explained, and there's no point in going to those directions. And don't forget anybody important. Did you talk to all the families involved in the class? Did you talk to a large donor, the community right around your school? Who else must you notify and talk to? Don't succumb to pressure. There is no issue beyond life and safety. If there's an immediate event going on, you're going to issue a command of evacuate, shelter in place, lockout, lockdown. Use the standard protocols. Get those. There's a notification tool if you have to send the messages out that's available to you through your RenWeb application. Those are all good things to be able to deal with. In a crisis, there are 3 types of communications. The first is coordination. Evacuate, shelter in place, lockdown, lockout. That coordination information should go out immediately. The second type is around the crisis. That can be delayed. We need to deal with the life safety issues first. And last is that of compliance. There's certain notifications that you're going to be required to do. Now you'll notice that you're not to turn over documents and computers unless directed by your legal counsel. That's why we pointed out that you want to have them as an advisor to your crisis management team. Don't take ownership of someone's grief. You don't know what this feels like. If you look at the 3 that are listed here, how can you understand what the death of that child means to them? It's going to be impossible. So don't talk about how it impacted you. The most that you can say is that your thoughts and prayers are with them. Don't reply, particularly initially, to anything on social media. Because then you're just increasing the SEO of those negative comments that are out there. More people will see that, and you're creating your problem. And don't ever communicate it through a third party, whether it's media or otherwise. If you need to communicate with the students, talk directly. If you need to communicate with the parents, talk directly. The same thing is true of your teachers. So what are the recommendations? First of all, you need to have plans. What kind of plans do you need to have? You need to have a crisis management plan that says this is how we make decisions in a crisis, and here are the people that are involved. Now that's different than your safety team. It's different than your emergency team. This is for the senior leadership of the school. You also need a crisis communications plan. What are our home bases? What are our message maps? What are we going to say in those particular areas? Then we focus on warning signs, having everybody understand what to look for. How do we identify the behaviors of concerns and do that before that gun comes to school, before the violent act happens? We have to have a standard way to make decisions around the threat management team or the threat assessment team within our school. Do you have anonymous reporting? And in today's world, we need anonymous text reporting. If you look at young people out at a restaurant, they'll type into their phone, pass the salt, instead of saying it. If you don't have anonymous reporting via text, you're going to be missing critical information that's out there. For example, gun in school is mentioned over 65 times a day in America. And if a parent comes to you and said, I saw this, why didn't you? It puts you in a bad light to make that. Worse, it means that you could have prevented an act and didn't choose to do it. There has to be awareness of these warning signs. You have to have involvement throughout the whole school. You need support resources externally, the insurance, the legal, the counseling, the crisis management. You want to create an open source intelligence network to monitor the social media so you can see this information coming in as it's occurring. I also would encourage you to talk with your insurance broker to make sure that your insurance coverages align to the vulnerabilities and risks that you have within your school. And then lastly, train and test your plans. Training is more than just running a fire drill. It's looking at each one of the types of things that you've thought could occur and what you're going to do. You can do a customized test within your school, or you can join one of the Firestorm virtual exercises and have your crisis team around a table, and they can experience it and see and benchmark their decisions to other schools around the country. Over this year, we have done active shooters, cyber breach, sexting, cyberbullying, Zika, and natural disaster. There's another exercise coming up in December, and again, those are free. So what are the next steps? Update your risk and threat assessment. Look at what could physically happen to your school. You should update it annually, and once every 3 years, you should go back to square one. For every risk and threat that you have, what would the impact be if that were to occur? What message would you want to send out? How are you going to monitor to see if that's about to happen, and what's the trigger to activate your plans? The plans, you need to align your crisis management plan with best practices. You've got to develop a crisis communications plan with these message maps, because it's easier to edit than to create. If you've laid this out, it's going to make a big difference. Then you need to contact us if you are in a crisis. We'll immediately get on the phone with you and help guide you through making those critical decisions, or support you in creating messages through that point. Again, that's an advantage you have because of your RenWeb relationship. You need to do an analysis of your current insurance and response plans, because to see if there are gaps, are there things that need to be in place, and then stress test your plan. Remember, we're following a Predict.Plan.Perform cycle here. There will be a brief based upon today's webinar, and you can go to firestorm.com, go to resources, go down to recorded webinars and briefs, and you can look at the other RenWeb webinars over the past years. You can share those. There'll be briefs from them. There'll be information that you can use within your school. So we've covered a lot of ground today. I would like, as we wrap up, just to thank RenWeb for their support of the program and making this information available to all of the RenWeb schools out there. As that number continues to grow, it'll make a difference. RenWeb, would you like to add any comments today?
Jim, I think we're good on our end. Again, I just want to thank you again for your commitment to all of our clients and future customers of what you offer and what Firestorm has to offer for all of our clients. Again, just noting that, you know, you guys are not afraid to get on the phone with them as they call and walk them through steps as these crises happen. So we just want to thank you for being a continued partner with us.
Well, we look forward to it. We hope we don't get on the phone with you in a crisis. That means one didn't occur. If one did occur, you need a place to go. And we're here, you know, and have worked with RenWeb to accomplish that. If you've got questions, you can go to the firestorm.com website. You can fill out a contact form. We'll be back in touch. You can drop us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or call us at 800-321-2219. There's an Irish blessing or an Irish curse, depending upon your point of view, that says, may you live in interesting times. We've looked at the last several months, and we've seen violence. We've seen natural disasters. We've seen threats of a variety of kinds that can come in. The students in your schools look to you. The parents look to you. Your teachers look to you. The time to think about what could happen is now, before it does. If it does occur, please give us a call. We're here to help. We look forward to working with you. We'd much prefer to have the call today when nothing's going wrong at your school and help you get ready. But if it comes down to it, we're there. We want to stand with you shoulder to shoulder. A crisis is business unusual. It's not business as usual. And every crisis is a human crisis. The parents of the fourth grader who lost their child at their school will never forget what this is like. We want your parents to remember the school years as a miracle, as something wonderful that happened in their lives. We look forward to working with you in every way. We couldn't answer all the questions that came in during the webinar, but I'm going to ask some of our Firestorm principals to try to reach out to everyone on the call today to answer questions. In the meantime, if you need us, this is how you find us. Thanks, everyone. Have a great October. I look forward to speaking with you next month. Goodbye.